A very good afternoon and welcome to the World News Review on Independent Television Abuja. I am Kiru Obuli. Starting off, a French woman has been sentenced to life imprisonment by an Iraqi court for being a member of the Islamic State group, also known as IS. Catherine Ayamese has the details of this and other stories on Foreign News.
An Iraqi court has sentenced a French woman to life in prison for membership in the Islamic State group. Melina Boghedril, 28, was initially sentenced to 6 months in jail for entering the country illegally. But the court imposed a tougher sentence Sunday after prosecutors presented new evidence, including pictures of her French husband posing with IS fighters. The verdict can be appealed. Boghedril, who was detained in the northern city of Mosul last year, appeared in court with her 2-year-old daughter. She was represented by 3 lawyers. Iraq detained thousands of people, including hundreds of foreigners, as it drove IS from Mosul and other areas. Some have been deported, while others have been sentenced in quick trials as the judiciary works through the large number of cases. Report says Cyclone killed at least 30 people when it barreled across Oman and Yemen last month. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies said in a statement that the majority of the fatalities happened on the Yemen island of Socotra, where 20 were killed. The Federation said in a statement that another 4 were killed in Yemen's Al-Marra governorate, which borders Oman. In Oman, authorities had previously said at least 6 people were killed by the storm. Cyclone Mekunu made landfall on the Iranian peninsula early May 26, causing flash floods and other damage. It earlier hit Socotra in the Arabian Sea. The cyclone naked maximum sustained wind of 170 to 180 kilometers per hour, with gusts of up to 200 kilometers per hour. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is to visit Kim Jong-un in North Korea. This was announced Sunday in what will be the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders. North Korea's state-run Korea Central News Agency said Assad expressed willingness to visit Pyongyang to meet with Kim on May 30 while receiving the credentials for the North Korean ambassador. Assad was also quoted saying he believed Kim would achieve the final victory and realize the reunification of Korea without fail. KCNA also reported Assad saying the Syrian government would fully support all policies and measures of the DPRK leadership. If the meeting occurred, it would be the first summit meeting by the foreign leader of Pyongyang. Kim has never hosted a meeting with any other foreign heads of state in the country capital. Assad and Kim seems to have a friendly relationship and are often quoted by KCNA, exchanging pleasant remarks and compliments to one another. A United Nations report leaked in February revealed investigators found North Korea was shipping more than 40 items to Syria used for ballistic missiles and weapon programs between 2012 and 2017.
An opposition coalition in Ivory Coast has rejected a 3rd term for President Alassane Ouattara, just as Jordanian Prime Minister resigned following a series of protests in his country. Charity Tanko has the details of this and other stories on Foreign News.
An opposition coalition in Ivory Coast has rejected any prospect of a 3rd term for President Alassane Ouattara, lashing it as anti-constitutional, unacceptable and unattainable. Ouattara came to power after a bloody 5-month crisis in 2010 to 2011 and is now in his 2nd term, which ends in 2020. In a communique, a large opposition coalition, Together for Democracy and Sovereignty, EDS, blasted his intention as pure provocation of the Ivorian people. Ouattara and his supporters said that under changes to the constitution in 2016, of which he himself was the architect, the starting point for presidential terms is now 0, that his 2 election victories in 2010 and 2011 do not count. This interpretation is contested not only by the opposition but also internationally, although some commentators see it as a tactic by Ouattara to tamp down quarrels within his party over his succession. Jordan's Prime Minister Hani Malki has resigned after several days of protest against tax rises and austerity measures. The recent demonstrations are the country's biggest in years. Protesters have chanted anti-government slogans and clashed with police, who have fired tear gas and blocked roads. The demonstrators say a new tax bill backed by the International Monetary Fund (IMF) will hurt the poor and middle class. Mr. Malki had refused to scrap the bill, saying it was up to Parliament to decide whether to pass it or not. His government said it needed the money to fund public services and said the new tax bill will mean higher earners pay more. But protesters feared it will further worsen living standards. In recent years, Jordanians have seen prices rise with salaries failing to keep up. Guatemala's most violent volcano eruption in more than a century has killed at least 25 people. The Fuego volcano, about 40 kilometers southwest of the capital Guatemala City, spewed rock, gas and ash into the sky on Sunday. Fast-moving flows hit villages, killing people inside their homes. Hundreds were injured and many are missing. The country's main airport is closed. President Jimmy Morales has declared 3 days of national mourning. In a statement issued late on Sunday, he spoke of the nation's deep pain caused by the irreparable losses in human lives.
Jihadists hacked 7 to death in northern Mozambique and burned several houses early Tuesday, just as Israeli security forces filed an alleged terror plot against Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's join Gabriel Kuma for the details of this and other stories on Foreign News.
Police said suspected jihadists hacked 7 people to death with machetes and torched dozens of homes early Tuesday in northern Mozambique, the region Cabo Delgado province, which is expected to become the center of the country's nascent natural gas industry after several promising discoveries, has seen a number of deadly assaults on both security forces and civilians since October. The spokesman said of the most recent attack, the cell also burnt down 164 houses and destroyed 4 cars during their assault on the village of Naudi in the Marcomian district. Israeli Security Service Shin Bet announced Tuesday the arrest of 3 Palestinians that were part of an alleged terror cell planning to attack Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. One of the suspects allegedly also planned attacks against the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem. A senior Canadian security delegation who trained Palestinian security forces in the West Bank, as well as other senior Israel officials, including Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat. The Shin Bet said the plot was orchestrated from Syria and it involved sneaking in an operative from Jordan and significant terrorist activities. The Israel Security Service said they began collecting intelligence on their targets over the past few months. 11 people were killed and 9 injured Tuesday in an explosion at an iron ore mine in northeast China's Liaoning province. 25 people are trapped in the mine run by National Coal Group Company. Some of the trapped victims were able to contact people outside. The injured have been rushed to hospital, and the municipal government in Benzi, where the accident occurred, has dispatched a rescue team. The incident took place while drilling a mining shaft. Deadly mining accidents are common in China due to lack of safety precautions. A gas leak killed at least 18 people working in a coal mine in central Hunan province in May last year.
A senior Syrian Kurdish official says his party is prepared to hold talks with the government in Damascus over the future of northeastern Syria and territories the Kurds control there. Ardar Khalil, one of the architects of the Kurdish administration in Syria, said on Wednesday that discussions within the party and with their allies have been ongoing about sending a delegation to test the waters and see if President Bashar al-Assad government is ready to accept an autonomous Kurdish area in the northeast. Khalil says previous Russian-sponsored talks yielded no result. The proposition comes a day after Turkey and the United States agreed on a roadmap to resolve a dispute over the northern Syrian town of Manbij, which is controlled by the US-backed Kurdish fighters whom Ankara view as terrorists. A general strike called by Jordan's major trade unions is holding in major cities across the Middle Eastern country as part of a week-long protest against a controversial proposed tax reform bill and price hikes. Thousands of protesters have continued their sit-ins across the country even after Prime Minister Hani al-Maliki was asked to resign by Jordan's King Abdullah II. The king appointed Omar al-Razaz as the new prime minister and tasked him with reviewing the tax plan and launching a national dialogue with unions and civil society groups. Razaz, a former World Bank economist who previously served as Jordan's education minister, is described as a likable figure among the Jordanian people. But protesters demand that the proposed tax law be scrapped entirely, arguing that a cabinet reshuffle is not enough to raise living standards. Various trade unions are also calling for a system overhaul. The government's economic reforms measures are the latest in a series of economic changes since Oman secured a $723 million three-year credit line from the International Monetary Fund (IMF) in 2016. Argentina has cancelled the Football World Cup warm-up match with Israel, apparently under pressure over Israel's treatment of Palestinians in Gaza. Strikers Gonzalo Higuain said they had finally done the right thing, but Israel's defense minister said it was too bad. Argentina's footballers did not withstand the pressure of the Israeli-hating inciters. The Israeli embassy in Argentina tweeted to confirm that the friendly, which was due to take place in Jerusalem on Saturday, had been suspended. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Argentina's president in an attempt to salvage the tie, but was told by Mauricio Macri that there was nothing that could be done, Israel's army radio reported. Argentine's Foreign Minister George Faure has said he believed the country's footballers were not willing to play the game. The news was met with cheers in Gaza, where at least 120 Palestinians were killed and thousands more injured by Israeli forces during recent protests. In Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank, the Palestinian Football Association issued a statement thanking Argentina's striker Lionel Messi and his teammates. Zimbabwe's ruling party supporters have marched for peace in the capital, Harare, a day after the opposition rallied thousands in demand of electoral reform. Let's join Oluwatoyin Yusuf for the details of this and other stories on the foreign scene.
A small crowd of supporters of Zimbabwe's ruling party has marched for peace in the capital, a day after the opposition rallied thousands of demand electoral reforms. Zimbabwe holds presidential elections on July 30th. It will be the first vote without the participation of former leader Robert Mugabe since independence from white minority rule in 1980. The ruling ZANU-PF party, which has been accused of using violence and fraud in previous elections, called the march a departure from the past. President Emerson Mnangagwa has invited Western countries to observe the election for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Meanwhile, an Israeli soldier has killed a Palestinian youth during a raid in the occupied West Bank village of Nabi Salim. Local reports said Wednesday, Ezzadim Tamimi was shot dead when troops came to arrest him over alleged stones. According to Palestinian activists, the soldier struck the 21-year-old with 3 bullets to the neck from a distance of around 45 meters. Villagers said paramedics were prevented from treating Tamimi as he bled out from his wounds. The Israeli army said one of its soldiers was hit by a rock while conducting the arrest and responded by shooting.
Burundian President Pierre Nkurunziza says Thursday he will not run for another term, despite widespread belief that he backed a new constitution extending term limits in a bid to cling to power. Nkurunziza said in a speech to supporters and diplomats in the central region of Gitega, his mandate ends in 2020. His announcement came shortly after he signed into law a new constitution that could enable him to rule until 2034. Describing himself as a guide of the ruling CNDD-FDD party, Nkurunziza said he will not seek re-election at the end of his current term, controversial third term. Nkurunziza's decision to run for election in 2015 plunged Burundi into a deep and deadly political crisis, with opponents saying his candidacy went against a peace deal that had ended more than a decade of civil war. Canadians have reacted with dismay to reports U.S. President Donald Trump questions whether Canada burned down the White House during a call with the country's leader, Justin Trudeau. British forces did set fire to the presidential residence during the War of 1812 with the United States, but Canada did not exist at the time. It was made up of British colonies. It is not clear if the comment was intended as a joke, but local media reports that it followed an exchange in which Mr. Trudeau asked how the U.S. could justify the tariffs as a national security issue. Medical sources say at least 17 people have been killed and 80 wounded in an explosion that destroyed a mosque in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. The government said the blast on Wednesday night were the result of the detonation of an ammunition cart in the Shiite Muslim district of Sadr City. It did not give an exact location of the cart, but some security officials said it was inside the mosque. The mosque was used by supporters of the Shiite cleric Muqtada Sadr. Jordan's new Prime Minister, Omar al-Razaz, on Thursday announced his government will repeal a controversial income tax bill once he is sworn in by King Abdullah II. Speaking to reporters after a meeting in the Jordanian parliament, Razaz said there was a consensus on withdrawing the tax bill that sparked nationwide protests that began last week and had been introduced as part of International Monetary Fund-backed economic reforms. The king appointed al-Razaz as the new prime minister on Tuesday and tasked him with reviewing the tax plan and launching a national dialogue with unions and civil society groups. Kenyan government Thursday said all 10 passengers of a small plane whose wreckage was discovered in central Kenya 2 days after it went missing died in the accident. A surveillance helicopter spotted the wreckage of the plane belonging to the FlySax airline near the town of Njabini on the edge of the Aberdares mountain range early Thursday morning. The plane, operated by East African Safari Air Express, took off from the western town of Kitale in the late afternoon Tuesday. It disappeared off the radar screens at Nairobi International Airport, its final destination around 80 minutes, the owners said in a statement. Kenya had been experiencing heavy rains, which along with foggy conditions hampered search efforts. A UN rights expert on North Korea says he hopes next week's U.S.-North Korea summit will lead to increased dialogue with Kim Jong-un on humanitarian issues. Thomas Oj Quintana told reporters in Geneva on Thursday that North Korea is struggling with a lack of food and that some 10 million people were in dire need of humanitarian aid. Oj Quintana said U.S. officials he had met agreed that it is important to put human rights on the agenda and that he hopes President Donald Trump will bring the issue up when he meets Kim in Singapore or at possible follow-up meetings. The deputy head of nation of the Israeli embassy located in Abuja, the federal capital territory, Nigeria, Nadav Goren, has urged Nigeria and Israel to take full advantage of their long-standing cordial relationship by laying greater emphasis on opportunities that will benefit both countries. He made the call during a courtesy visit to independent television Abuja. Goren emphasized on what Israel has been able to do in Nigeria as they celebrate 50 years of cordial relationship with Nigeria.
We are celebrating more than 50 years of relationship with Nigeria. It's always, when you look at the relationship between Israel and Nigeria, it's important to understand it is not only pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a part of it. Okay, we definitely have a lot of pilgrims who are coming, and we welcome them in Israel. But definitely there is a lot of other areas such as economics, development, public diplomacy, And definitely all these areas are areas where we have worked over the years a lot, have a robust relationship, and look to enhance. What does Israel have to bring to the table to Nigeria? And that is, and I always go to a simple sentence, it's turning challenges into opportunities.
He further harped on the need for peace to strive in the country against all odds.
When you talk about peace, you talk about the people, and people on all sides want peace and prosperity, and that is our true belief. I think that there are challenges. It's not a challenge, it's not an easy road, but definitely that is our outlook, and that is what we want, and that is what we strive for.
A South African man who murdered his parents and brother has been sentenced to life in prison. Let's join Blessing Omoru for this and other stories on the foreign scene.
Sitting in the High Court, Judge Siraj Desa said the cold-blooded murders had been carried out without excessive and gratuitous violence. Van Brether's defense lawyer says he intends to appeal. The case has horrified South Africans, with one paramedic telling the court the scene in the family's upmarket Stellenbosch home was the worst thing he had seen in a career spanning almost 4 decades. Van Brether, then just 20, used an axe to slaughter his father, Martin, 54, his mother, Teresa, 55, and older brother, Rudy, 22, as they slept. He also attacked his sister, Mali, then just 16, apparently leaving her for dead. Van Brether denied all charges against him, claiming he had also been a victim of a man he claimed had broken in and attacked his family. However, the court did not believe his version of events, finding him guilty of 3 counts of murder, 1 of attempted murder, and 1 of obstructing justice in May, more than 3 years after the vicious assault. An Uzbek man who carried out a lorry attack which killed 5 people in Sweden last year has been sentenced to life for terrorist crimes. Rakhmat Akilov, 40, had expressed sympathy for the Islamic State IS group before the attack in Stockholm, but prosecutors had to prove he intended to harm the state, as IS did not say it was behind the attack. Akilov, a rejected Aslam seeker, fled the scene but was quickly arrested and confessed during police interrogation. He left Uzbekistan for Sweden in 2014 and sought residency there, but in December 2016 he was told that he had 4 weeks to leave the country. He disappeared and a few months before the attack was put on an official wanted list. On 7th April last year, Akilov jacked a lorry and drove it at a high speed down one of Stockholm's busiest shopping streets and into a department store. 5 people were killed and 10 more injured in the attack on Drottninggatan. Akilov reportedly ran from the scene still covered in blood and glass, but was arrested hours later in a northern suburb of Stockholm. The Afghan government has announced a temporary ceasefire with the Taliban, but says fighting with other militants will continue. President Ashraf Ghani said the week-long ceasefire would coincide with the end of the Ramadan fasting month Eid. The Taliban have yet to respond. Last week they denied they were in secret talks with Afghan officials. Tens of thousands of Afghans have been killed since US-led troops drove the Taliban from power in 2001. Previous offers of peace talks and ceasefires have come to nothing. Earlier this week, a prominent gathering of religious clerics issued a fatwa condemning militant violence as UN Islamic and were themselves targeted in a suicide attack claimed by the Islamic State IS group. Mr. Ghani said his government supported the clerics, ruling and that Afghan people wanted the conflict settled peacefully. The ceasefire is due to come into effect next week.
And for Foreign News Friday, our correspondent is standing by.
United States President Donald Trump has called for an end to Russian expulsion from the group of 7 leading economies in the world. The president had on South Lawn of the White House on Friday made a case for Russia's readmission into G8, which became G7 following the annexation of Crimea. Russia was expelled from the G7 4 years ago following its role in the Crimean crisis. Trump quoted as saying that Russia should be readmitted to the G7, thereby breaking with other world leaders who have insisted that Moscow remained ostracized following its involvement in the 2014 Crimea crisis. And in Germany, the German government says a young Iraqi man suspected in the rape and murder of a 14-year-old schoolgirl in western Germany has been arrested in his homeland. The Interior Ministry said 20-year-old Ali Bashar was arrested by Kurdish security forces in the northern Iraq early Friday at the request of the German police. The girl disappeared on May 22nd and her body was found Wednesday in West Badin. Authorities then said Bashar had left with his family abruptly last week, traveling to northern Iraq via Turkey. Bashar arrived in Germany in 2015 at the height of the influx of refugees and other migrants. He was appealing the rejection of his asylum application, and police said he was suspected in a string of previous offenses in the same area. The United Nations Security Council has imposed sanctions on 6 leaders of human trafficking networks operating in Libya. The first time traffickers have been put on an international sanctions list. The blacklisted 6 are 4 Libyans, including the head of a regional Coast Guard unit and 2 Eritrean nationals. Smugglers have been taking advantage of insecurity in Libya to move hundreds of thousands of migrants by sea to Europe. Many migrants are trapped in detention centers and beaten by traffickers. The sanctions, a global travel ban and asset freeze were the result of an internationally backed Dutch proposal. The proposal was initially presented on 1st May, but held up by Russia, which sought to examine the evidence against the 6 men.
And that's the size of the World News Review on Independent Television Abuja. Many thanks for staying with us. I'm Ikiru Obuli. Do enjoy the rest of the day.